Hello and welcome to this special show. I'm Parikshit Luthra. With less than 10 days to go for the union budget, the Indian industry remains optimistic about the country's growth prospects. In FY27, despite a fragile global economic environment, a pre-budget survey by industry body FICCI shows that around half of the participants expects India's GDP growth rate to be between 7 and 8% in FY26. The survey conducted among nearly 100 companies across sectors indicates that 42% expect the government to meet its fiscal deficit target of 4.4% in FY26. The Indian industry identified job creation as the top priority, followed by sustained capital expenditure. Over 50% respondents also highlighted the need for stronger support to exports amid the trade uncertainty, to boost export performance and deepen India's integration into global value chains. Industry has called for streamlining trade facilitation and customs processes, reducing logistics and port-related bottlenecks, and strengthening export incentive and refund mechanisms in terms of sectors. Most respondents expect greater impetus for infrastructure, manufacturing and defence. Joining us now to discuss this further is Naina Kidwai, past president of FICCI, and Jyoti, the current Director General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Thank you so much for being with us. Ms. Kidwai, if I can begin with you, this is a challenging global environment. How does the Indian industry expect the government to deliver a high growth rate? And what would be the levers of that which will deliver the high growth rate of 8% or maybe even higher?
So the survey is always interesting because it validates maybe some of one's own personal aspirations, expectations, but also gives us a very good check on what's happening out there. I think I was quite struck by the optimism that we would not only achieve the 7 to 8%, but do it with the fiscal deficit under control. And there is an expectation that India continues on that path. So specifically, job creation figured very high, as you showed earlier in your slide as well. Job creation, it becomes very critical at a time when industries such as the diamond industry, apparels, leather, employment-intensive industries have seen quite a serious knock from the US tariffs. And hence, I think you find the expectation that the government do more in terms of aiding and supporting exports, both in terms of job creation, manufacturing, and exports themselves. Because tariffs are not just with these three industries, but also with the European CBAM and deforestation norms, the sort of non-tariff barriers that may emerge, all impact the performance of Indian exports. And looking to streaming this, there are indeed expectations that we get our SEZ policies right, the rationalization of customs in the budget, where there was a very high resonance on more simplification and implementation therein. And indeed, the creating clusters, for example, the electronics clusters, to ensure that we can continue the thrust on exports, which in turn hopefully leads to more job creation across different sectors and the capital expenditure that also follows from the private sector becoming an important aspect of our expectations going forward.
Ms. Kidwai, I'm going to come back to you. Let me get in Jyoti as well. Jyoti, we've spoken about how to make exports more competitive. In the survey that you've done with top members of FICCI, how can we make exports more competitive, and what kind of reforms, what kind of measures can the budget deliver to achieve that? Ms. Vij, you're on mute. All right. Ms. Vij, I'll come back to you in some time because you're not able to hear us. I think you're on mute. But Ms. Kidwai, if I can come back to you, job creation has been listed as a priority, macroeconomic theme by 71% of the respondents. But how can the government deliver on greater job creation?
So one key area will, of course, be through exports, as we just discussed. Job creation is very specific to certain industries. There are highly capital intensive industries which will not create the jobs that we want. However, the service sector is an important one which continues to see a thrust and indeed also sees investment coming from offshore into these large number of centers of excellence which are being established and therefore continue to generate that growth. The thrust on manufacturing also helps to the extent that there are industries which are labor intensive. Electronics, to some extent, fits that categorization. And then, of course, to sort through the issues we have with our labor intensive sectors that have got affected by the tariffs that the US has imposed. I think as we look at this going forward, and I mentioned the SEZs, the more manufacturing we can attract by making the entire process of setting it up, clusters in these SEZs, enabling supply chains to come in, which therefore help MSMEs. And MSMEs by and large tend to be quite people intensive, job intensive, I think would be another way as well. But the job creation aspect is something which is clearly engaging government, and it is indeed very much top of mind for industry as well. I would hope to see some stuff on tourism, because that again is a huge job employment creator.
Right. Ms. Switch, I hope you're able to hear us now. When it comes to structural reforms, what does your survey say on what the government can deliver and what would be some of the 2 or 3 priority areas?
So I think on the structural reforms, one of it has always been the factors of production. And there was, an announcement regarding this in the last budget when we said that we will be now working towards the cost of doing business as well. I think some of this is being addressed through the committee that has been formed under Mr. Gauba. But that still remains a very high priority, be it land, power, finance, etc. Within finance, I think bond market still remains. I think there is some action that we continue to feel that there is some more action that is needed. As far as the power goes, there are cross subsidies; those could be dealt with. So some of these can add to the competitiveness of the industry. And these are going to be very important. I mean, that said, apart from this decriminalization aspects that are being taken care of, the deregulation, a lot of things which have the center has eased, but the states have to implement. I think at the state level, a lot of reform are still pending, which need to be kind of, activated and pushed forward.
All right. Now, when it comes to direct tax, on ease of taxation, ease of compliance, what does the Indian industry want from the budget and the kind of messages the industry wants to hear, Ms. Pidge?
Yeah, so actually the compliances is what we feel require a lot more simplification. So that's one big theme which is coming out of the survey as well. So we require a lot more digitization to happen. I think there has been a good progress on the digitization in both direct and the GST and customs, but that's one area where we continue to push forward. There are areas where we feel that the 2 departments don't speak to each other, even if they have the technology. So how do we create that common interface? So whether it is the reference to the data sitting in one of the systems, or it is about integrating the information. I think those are the areas which are very, very critical. There is also, I think, the tax certainty is something which we feel is very, very critical in terms of policy rates, all of that. And dispute resolution remains a very big bucket. So we've also analyzed that, under the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals, there's a humongous amount of pendency. So one of the recommendations has been that can we have a dual track so we can divide between the low impact cases and the high impact cases and try and kind of, at least take care of the low impact ones faster so that dependency really improves and we can manage the litigation process really better. So this is something which is really high on the minds of the taxpayer. There's a lot that has been done on the rationalization of taxes. I think there are various other aspects that have been taken care of under tax. But dispute resolution remains a very big one. And I think the simplification of compliances falls as a bucket under that.
Right. Ms. Kidwai, now, when it comes to the India-US trade deal, that's been a major overhang for the stock markets as well. It has impacted sentiments to a great extent. How do we turn that around? Because it's no longer in our hands as to when we can have that trade deal. We've already given them a good proposal. The USTR has also said that India has given the best ever deal proposal ever. It's up to Donald Trump to sign it. There is no timeline to that. We can't keep waiting. But how do we protect ourselves in this global environment and in the absence of a trade deal?
So, Parikshit, hard to protect ourselves from the volatility that comes from repeated announcements. And I think we now reached a stage where there were many expectations that this whole process close, and it hasn't. So it's already, I think, factored in. I don't believe the market is expecting anything till it happens. So to that extent, we're not in a bad place in that our markets have held up pretty well. And it's not as if there's been a collapse on any front. But we remain vulnerable, and probably less from just the trade with the US and the impact therein of tariffs, which impact, the studies I see go from 0.5 to 1% of GDP. But the more worrisome one is energy and the price of energy, which fortunately for us has held out well in that it hasn't risen. But even as we look to newer sources of energy, as we move away from Russian sources of fuel, we have issues with Venezuela, which we relied on, with Iran. These were all countries which were possibilities for us to import oil. And to the extent that we can see that crude stays in this $50 to $60 bucket, we're okay. But volatility therein and the depreciation of the rupee, which I think is the most hurtful right now, it helps exports, so that's good. But on the other hand, it puts our import bill up, as you well know. And it certainly impacts the foreign investor that looks at India and worries about the good returns that we can get in India getting washed out completely by a depreciating rupee. And that depreciation of the rupee comes from some of these fears, including crude oil dependencies.
Right. My final question to Jyoti Vij. Ms. Vij, when it comes to the capex headline from the union budget, that's always looked for very closely by the Indian industry. What would be the expectation?
So it's the continuation of, what has been done over the last few years that is still required for some more time. And I'm sure, the budget will continue to lay focus on as much capex as they have done in the past, because this will definitely help in hastening the crowding in of the private investment. We've already started to see the demand really spurring up. And I think this last mile support is very, very critical for us to, come through. And I think infrastructure push along with that is also very important for resolving a lot of, issues related to logistics and stuff, which we have seen massive improvement, given the thrust on the capex, which government has laid in the last few years. So I think that continuity is a must, and I'm sure that will continue to be a theme in the budget of this year as well.
All right, Ms. Jyoti Vij and Naina Kidwai, thank you very much for joining us on CNBC-TV18 with the FICCI budget survey. Let's see what the finance minister now delivers on the 1st of February. On that note, we take a short break, but lots more from Davos when we return.